Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Marketing Roundtable, a digital marketing podcast. My name is Brandon Jones, and I'm the producer, and I'm also a paid media strategist, and I'm going to hand it over to Brian Cosgrove, the host for today.
Hi, I'm Brian Cosgrove, principal of Braindew and analytics strategist, and we're here today to talk with Josh Silverbauer.
Hello, everybody. Josh Silverbauer here. I'm the head of analytics and CRO From the Future, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
It's great having you on.
Awesome. So, Josh, a lot of what we've done in a lot of our past episodes is we're trying to tell the story a little bit about how someone gets to the level that you're at. So, right now, you're currently doing a lot of work in the space of CRO. And for people who don't know what CRO is, it's can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, ultimately, conversion. It stands for CRO, which is everybody hates a good acronym, right? Because half the people will know it and half the people will assume what it means, and then probably 1% gets it right. But CRO stands for conversion rate optimization, and when you hear that, you're like, well, what does that even mean? Right. Well, conversion rate optimization is really anything. When people think of conversion rate optimization, those who do know it, for the majority of the people who do know it, think about A/B testing generally, right? It's like, if you think about a website, it's seeing one version or a group of people seeing one version of the website and another group of people seeing another version. And then they're testing to see, which version actually is getting people to do the action that you want them to do at a higher rate, right?
Right.
However, it's not all that. It's also, beyond just testing. It's also just anything that can improve people taking the action that you want them to take on a website, right? And actions in general can go beyond a website. You can test anything. You can test email conversion rate, right? So
Sure.
It's just optimizing an action that you want people to take in that moment, usually via digital.
Yeah.
So that's
So I mean, to your point, I think you've covered it pretty well. It's really the UX side of a lot of the digital analytics work, right? So we're collecting some details, some signals and messages that say, hey, this part of a website or web page or even an app was interacted with. And there's a certain desired path that people want the customer or the user to take. And you're doing what you can to either test out different versions of those pages or otherwise kind of understand and really analyze what could be done to make that application, do what it's designed to do. And so this is an area that, kind of overlaps with user experience design.
Yep.
It certainly overlaps with a lot of the tools that people might use for marketing analytics, but it's kind of its own thing.
Well, it's an interesting combination of creative, right? Where you have to think of, what could be better, what could make this experience better, right?
Right.
And that's, ideas of what could be better. And then measurement, right? Like, is it actually improving, right? So it takes, it takes a left-right brain, that
Mhm.
wants to, a pendulum, right? That wants to swing back and forth in the brain to, come up with good ideas and then have the patience to measure them,
Right. And you even mentioned that it can extend to other areas like direct mail, or it could extend to other forms of marketing or messaging. So,
Mhm.
I mean, to that point, ultimately, it's about people taking action. And you
Yeah.
use the word conversion. And so in our industry, people really do mean that to be whatever that desired action is. And it
Yeah.
could be filling out a form. It could be purchasing a product. It could be, whatever it is from this screen, where do you want them to go to next?
Exactly. And it can be very one-dimensional, or it can be,
Yeah.
10 steps down the road, right? A one-dimensional email campaign where you're trying to do conversion rate, it could be just a click on that link, and you're
Right.
testing 2 different versions of an email. But it could also be, what, if you have enough data, what that link ended up producing on the website, and then ultimately down the road they ended up submitting the form that you want, and you're testing that form itself, right?
Yeah.
So there's definitely, depending on, again, how much data you have to make an actual, this is actually true um, improvement, right? You want to have that too, but like, it really, you can do it with anything ultimately if you have enough data.
And so in your world, when you talk about the data, there are certain different kinds of tools that you use,
Mhm.
to actually do this analysis. And they collect different levels of fidelity of data. Can you share a little bit about kind of the current state? Like, what are people using today? What kinds of tools do you think, classes of tools, are the most useful for people listening? And sort of how do they fit in to the mission of what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely, it really depends on what sector of CRO we're talking about, right? Which, helps select the tool, or what tools we're talking about here. So like if we're talking about purely A/B testing, right? There are um, tools that are developed, like Optimizely or convert.com, or uh, there used to be Google Optimize, right? That these are tools that were built to support testing on your website, right? Like they
Right.
handle splitting traffic on your site, and then they usually come with a visual editor where you can, change a few things if you want to change your button from red to blue, and see
Yeah,
how that
yeah, yeah.
affects, right? They will handle all of that in the platform, and then it will also tell you when and if your variation reaches statistical significance on its improvement, right?
Right.
And so, that can be very helpful so that you don't have to go and, find it somewhere in an alternative analytics tool, right? But you can use, if you are still, if you really, really wanted to, you could use
Yeah.
something like Google Tag Manager or something to even, just set up your own tests and handle that stuff too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of tests, there's a lot of types of testing software out there, and depending on your level of sophistication, it can inform kind of the tool that you end up using. There's also like behavioral analytics tools, which are more for trying to understand. They're more almost for the ideation stage. You're trying to understand what's wrong, right? You're trying
Mhm.
to come up with theories, right? If you have and these tools like, like Microsoft Clarity or Hotjar, right? These tools are there to help show you visually what people are doing on the website, right? Whether that's a session recording, where you're actually seeing people's sessions, or like a heat map where you're seeing, where people are clicking or scrolling, and you can make observations from that, saying, "Oh wow, my form is like 75% down the page. No one's reaching that, right? So like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
let's bring it up." So you can come up with those type of, observations. And then there's qualitative, right? Surveys, forms, where you're actually asking people and getting a bunch of data on, what do you think about this? Is the user experience good or not on my site, right? Like, how'd you feel about, uh, going through the site? What would you want, to improve? And that can be really helpful too from an ideation perspective. And it's all about, what can we make better? What can we do
Yep.
ultimately to make this better? And that will help with dictating whatever you end up doing, testing or just improving.
Right. So you just mentioned three classes of tools. You've
Hmm.
got one set of tools that, like you said, the Microsoft Clarities of the world, the Hotjars, where you're looking at sessions, you're looking at behavior, you're trying to understand what happens in sequence, you're trying to get context to make some improvements. And I imagine that you're also maybe baselining or otherwise trying to figure out what's the current rate right now for people moving into the next stage. What do we know? Are they even behaving like they're the right people? A lot of details around like that might help you identify an opportunity.
Yep.
Now, you mentioned with that, you also have the ability to get qualitative information, surveys. You can ask people when they're on these different places, have you found what you're looking for? Things like that. You could ask specific questions. You can interject those with surveys. And then the last set of tools that you mentioned, this is where you mentioned the red versus blue button piece. And there you're saying that, all right, with this, hey, there's a theory that blue buttons might be better than red buttons, or red buttons might be better than blue buttons. And you get to go in there and you're like, look, we have a hunch, but let's prove it.
Yep.
You're able to go and run it against real sessions in real time, swapping the red button out for a blue one and actually seeing if people with the blue button or the red button actually get to the next step. So that's kind of how you can, and you mentioned statistical significance and all of the integrity around that, so that it's more of a scientific piece than just an opinion, just a
Yep.
theoretical
Yep.
piece.
And I would say there's one more big tool out there for
Sure.
this, and it's called your brain. And like some observations don't need to come from an analytical place, right? You can simply just look at a site and use what is said as heuristics, right? This is just observations based off of your own UX intuition of, is there potential friction here based off
Yeah.
of messaging, based off of, how the site was laid out. If you have, like, I will say that, and I don't want to get too digressive here on the conversation, but, when I had I was working with a chiropractor who I would trade website services for, and he would trade me chiropractic sessions, which was great.
Nice. Yeah.
And I checked out his website, and he had a JavaScript blocker on his personal website, and he didn't see that there was some that essentially someone had hacked into his site, and there was a like the DVD thing that just like hits the different corners. Well, and like never, it just bounces around the TV. Well, there was something like that, but it was very dirty. And I'm not going to go into what it was, that was just going around the
Oh, wow.
website, right?
Uh,
Well, that was probably hindering conversions, I would guess. Right.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
need some measurement tool to tell
No.
me that. Right.
Right,
So
right,
there
right.
are certain things that you can see with your own eyes and have observations and hypotheses to say, okay, we don't even need to test that. Let's just remove that. Right. And so,
Right.
coming up with ideas as well on what else would, improve conversion rate just from your old noggin.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, and to that point, your goal is just to make the website or the app better.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
And
And so,
it's a continual process, right? Because it's never going to be perfect. And the standards of what is good design changes too. And what resonates changes, right? So you can't just be like, great, we made this improvement and that's it. In 6 months, you might want to test something else with that exact same thing, because the standards around what is, accepted from a design perspective or from, a messaging perspective change.
I mean, but for everybody listening here, there's a career path where you can become the expert
Yep.
on how to make these websites and these apps work better.
Yep.
And in this case, it's not about the marketing function. It's not about some of the other sort of upstream, like how we got the traffic. This is the traffic we have. How do we get it to do the thing we want?
Exactly. Yep. It's a
All right.
support system for every traffic source, right?
Yes.
It doesn't matter if people are sending paid media traffic or it's organic or all of these things. It's like, it doesn't matter how somebody gets to your house. You want to have a clean house so that people like your house,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So there's a career in this for people that already know a bit about data and a bit about analytics, that um that they can play this central role at making these large websites, these large apps work well. And so currently you're doing this work with a company called From the Future.
Yep.
Can you tell me a little bit about them?
Yep. From the Future is a customer experience first agency. So, it really focuses on, everything from top of funnel, first impression all the way down to the final, if we're talking about B2B sales, the
Cool.
actual sale itself versus, and focuses on every step in between. Right. Like, what is the ad doing when it pushes somebody to the website? What does the website look like when that person gets there. Then ultimately, are they converting, right? Are they filling out the form we want them to fill? Why not? Why yes, right? Then they're in the funnel of the sales funnel. How's sales performing? What is the sales actually saying to their customers? Is there opportunity there? So thinking about every single step in that process from start to finish around what makes, what ultimately creates a valuable customer for, because a lot of times it's fragmented where people do this part of it, but not that part of it. And ultimately, like, this is all one journey for a customer. Right. And so
Yeah.
what does that full journey look like?
And so, kind of, working in an agency or in a professional services capacity, you're working with lots of different big brands and you're trying to solve these kinds of problems. What's a typical week look like for you?
It really, I mean, this is why I love agency.
Yeah.
Agency, it takes a very, specific personality to embrace, being at an agency, as you guys probably know, because
Yeah.
it's chaos and you have to like chaos, right? But
Mhm.
chaos, it's controlled chaos where, you have, you know, all these different clients who have these businesses and something can go wrong in any one of these sections. So you have to kind of jump around into
Yeah.
what is the most valuable thing to, that I can do in this moment for this situation, right? And that might be testing, but that also might be observations, or that might be optimizing a lead score for, so that the sales team can make better decisions around where they focus their time, right? And so
Right.
each one of these sections are opportunities that can be focused on or tweaked to make it better for that business. And so every week I'm doing something a little bit different, finding the friction, right? Which is all part of that conversion rate optimization, and fixing the friction or improving the friction. I don't necessarily know
Right.
what will ever fix the friction, but improving the outcome of the friction.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, so you've been there for a bit now, but you have a pretty interesting backstory.
I do.
Can you tell
Yes.
me kind of how does someone get into this role? How does someone even get into this, uh, place to be doing this work at the level that you're doing it at? Tell me a little bit about your journey to get there.
Sure thing, and you guys can cut this for time if you want, but I'm gonna go and I'm gonna start at the beginning. I'm gonna start. I was born in Philadelphia. No, I'm just kidding. I was, but it. So I would say the journey started actually before I ever knew I wanted to do this. I went into school into Emerson College for marketing.
Mhm.
And I just did not resonate with it. And the reason is because digital wasn't even digital yet, right? This is 2004. Facebook was just starting, right?
Yeah.
Sending, accounts to the Boston schools. I was in Boston, so I got a Facebook account, but really, they were teaching traditional marketing in school. I didn't really dig it. And my friends were all film majors. So I ended up with an audio engineering degree so that I could go on to films and, help people out in, doing film stuff. And I was always a musician. So I wanted to be around music, but not have to, have people judge the music that I created. So got out of school, did music, and played in a band for 5 years out of school, which was great. I worked in coffee shops. It was awesome. And really did nothing with a career at that point.
Sure.
Met my current wife who, was like, why don't you try something else? And I was like, oh, okay, maybe I should try something else. Maybe I should do something with this degree. So I went back into, I got an internship at a Apple and Adobe training center. And at the Apple and Adobe training center, I wanted to relearn music production, right? But the
Mhm.
internship was sales. And I had been put on basically going through their Salesforce and calling people and adding lists, right? And I was
Sure.
like, man, they do not have this set up very well to be able to prioritize my time around having to call people, because there's certain people who are more potentially valuable than other people based off of the attributes that we know about them, but that doesn't say anything, or those aren't actually uploaded in a way that we could get to those lists, right? I was just going in order. I said, you know what? I'm going to redesign the Salesforce because I'll just teach myself how to do it to make my life easier. So this is a key point for the people listeners out there. Oftentimes when you start doing something, it's to solve a problem for yourself, right?
Yeah.
And that's a lot about CRO too. What problem do you have when you go and explore something like this, like a site, right? Where do you see the friction, right? And that's a hypothesis there, right? And so that is the way of thinking that led me onto a path to end up here. But ultimately, I fixed up their Salesforce. They were like, wow, that's great. You want a job? And I said, sure. And so then I ended up rising up to the marketing manager of that company. I ultimately got kind of bored only doing it for one brand. So I joined another agency, my first agency, which is called Syndicate Strategies. And I taught myself all about Google there. And then the salesperson or the CEO would bring me to different places to sell the value of analytics. And I said, well, if I can sell analytics and I can do analytics, why do I need a job? So I started my own agency at that point.
So let's pause there.
Yeah.
There's a lot to recap. So it's so you went from tried marketing, didn't like it.
Yes.
And it was at the beginning of digital, so the marketing that you tried wasn't exactly the flavor that you work on today.
Right.
You're into music. You're into audio production. You're into, I presume composition and making things work together.
Yes. Yep.
So and people often talk about how music and math have a strong connection. That there's a lot of math to music. There's sort of a different, sort of different skill sets on how you bring those pieces together. But here you were kind of in an interesting career crossroads. You're trying out this Adobe and Apple, opportunity. You're in sales, you're looking at a screen, and you don't like what you see. You don't like how it works. So all of this came out of you noticing really that that this could be better.
Yes.
That something about this interface could be better.
Yes.
And so, to your point about the listeners out here, it's like if you notice screens or websites or pages could be better and you sort of have a compulsion to want to make it better, this could be a good career path for you.
Totally. It's all about, you and your own ability to recognize that there's a problem that you want to fix, and the rest is just, making a compelling argument about it. And, and if you have a hypothesis that really resonates and of a way to show data that, is ultimately can say this is true or not, even if you don't win, right? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But even if you don't win, it's still about learning around what works and what doesn't work, right? And the more you do that, the more you can, make better educated decisions, just like it's science,
Of course. But you started this kind of in a CRM system, Salesforce. And I can't imagine that you had the tool set that you have today. You had to start off with an intuition.
Yeah.
Right? Like you had to start off with intuition that it could be better.
Totally. It was I will never, and I think the listeners out there, this is a great approach to life. Never feel like you are stuck. Always feel like you can create a better, situation for yourself, whatever that looks like for you, but like just feeling stuck is the worst feeling. So try to figure out how you can make it better. And that can ultimately give you additional skills to be able to, that with coupling it with the mentality of saying yes to yourself, is really important. It's really important.
So you convinced them to let you kind of make changes or improve the system. And then you were saying at that point, analytics tools came into play. So tell me a little bit about just that period right there where you went from, hey, this could be better, to convincing people to give you a shot at actually making it better, and then sort of the evolution of that.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, no one was really managing the sales force. They had it stood up, and I basically was like, "Hey, you don't have to pay me anymore. I'm just gonna do this." Right. It was
Yeah.
very much like it was my first job, so I was like very, I was like, I think I was making like 29,000 a year. Right. It was just like
Sure.
it was nothing,
Yeah.
and I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna manage all this stuff for you, and you don't have to pay me anymore. I'm just going to do it because I'm interested in it." And they were like, sure, And so,
Yeah.
that ultimately, when I started to do that and I started to like that, I started to look at what other opportunities were there at that company that no one was really doing, but they had what other softwares. And one of them was Google Ads, right?
Mhm.
And Google Ads it was brand new to me, but no one was really managing it, right? They had a head of marketing at that point, but they were more just kind of like direct mail and all that stuff. No one was really paying too
Yeah.
much attention to what had been set up and forget up, in the
Yeah.
Google Ads. And so I was like, I'll teach myself that too. And that kind of like, I was like, I will take on the Google Ads as well, that
Yeah.
led me to Google Analytics. And I realized how much I loved analytics at that point. I had never taken anything that had anything to do with numbers, besides since high school, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
loved, I loved I don't know, I loved how all the pieces could fit together, and, the psychology of, I love psychology. So the psychology of people and like the psychology of looking at how people take action. And that kind of led me to Google Tag Manager, which was my ultimate love, because that is all about architecture and puzzles. And I was a puzzle person, how does
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
fit
Yeah.
together with this to make this, And so, yeah, I mean, the pathway to analytics was like deeply through my love for like basically setting up yeah, and puzzles and having the ultimate kind of, puzzle to show people.
There's so much to think about there. So you kind of gave your management at that first job an offer they can't refuse.
Right.
Basically, you're not only going to do the tasks they assign to you, you're going to just make the whole system better.
Yes.
And they're not going to pay you more for it. But it's a good way for you to get applied professional experience. And you had to win them over. Like, you had to sell yourself that
Yeah.
you could actually make it better. They had to trust you to give you the opportunity.
Hmm.
And you clearly, resoundingly earned their trust. Now they're having you look at other software systems unrelated, and you're solving problems there
Yep.
with Google Ads. That leads you immediately to Google Analytics. Now you're seeing traffic. Now you're seeing people actually coming to the website and what happens. A tool set you didn't necessarily have on Salesforce to begin with. You've now got this new tool set. And then that leads you, like you said, to Google Tag Manager, which is, how do I even deploy tools like this? How do I
Right.
track different key events? How do I kind of put all the puzzle pieces together? So now you're sort of architecting the system, the data set that you're collecting. And you did all of this without going to school for it, without even, it sounds like, being directly mentored at the time with experts in this. You sort of you're kind of self-taught. Is that
I
right?
am self-taught. I mean, there were like there were the people out there on the web like
Right.
Simo Ahava and
Mhm.
Julian Waneman who were creating these tutorials and throwing them out there on YouTube for basically free for people on, this is how these systems work. And I learned like, I think like, for me, I'm never good at throw me in a room with a teacher and be taught, because I
Right.
just oftentimes don't resonate with that. I have to kind of look and find the tutors and the mentors that I want to learn from, and they were that for me
Yeah.
unofficially until years later where now I know them and, I'm in the same, group as them, but like
Yeah.
it was like years of just learning from online videos.
Yeah, and so it's amazing how far you can get with that, but also the fact is that a lot of times, even if you wanted to learn a lot of this in a school or university, they're not exactly operating at the current pace with the exact tool set being used in business
Yeah,
today.
totally. Yeah.
Um, it's more academic and theoretical than applied. And so you're doing this work. It's going super well. You're learning Google Tag Manager. You're still working for this company, I presume. What's next? Or you mentioned maybe starting at a small agency. So tell
Yeah.
me a little bit about that transition. So how do you go from, hey, I'm doing this for this one company I work for, to I'm doing this in a professional services environment. I'm selling this service.
After about 2 years at the, agents at the, the brand, that I was at, I realized that I had all of these skills now that I
Yeah.
thought were really potentially valuable. So I started to look at other opportunities of people who wanted these type of skills like analytics and stuff. And I found a small agency outside Philly and they were like, hey, we're looking for somebody who is going to be our I think it was marketing oh man, I don't even remember the title. It was like marketing strategist, right? I was like, that sounds good. That sounds like a good title for a next step, so let's do that. And they put me on Google Ads and Analytics and Tag Manager, and I was really the person who would be the implementation person there. And I like the idea of an agency because it's more puzzles to figure out.
Yeah,
You
yeah, yeah,
know, it's just
yeah.
more and more. And like, with a brand, you have that one puzzle, and you're constantly. I mean, there's a lot to do within that, but like throwing 10 clients into the mix where all of them have all these problems, it's fun to try to figure out all those things. So, um, I started to really understand analytics at that point, and I started to understand how people didn't understand analytics at that point because it was pretty early. Google Analytics was wasn't new, but it was still like people were, didn't
Yeah, well, about
really.
what year was
Yeah,
this?
this is like 13,
213. Okay,
2012,
gotcha.
2013, right? So it's,
Yeah.
it was there, but it was still pretty infant and like, people a lot of businesses had it on their websites, but no one really knew what they were really doing with it. And I just started to really try to lean in on architecture. What could be
Mhm.
better? What's actually valuable? What do people care about? And does that reflect the analytics? That's still what I do today, right? I go in and I look and I say, what are people asking people to do here? And is the
Uh,
analytics set up to reflect that? You know,
mhm,
what's
mhm.
what are the questions that people care about? What helps them make better decisions, faster decisions? Is that
Yeah.
what the analytics has in there? No, it's a bunch of either like bad setup stuff or like just, like noise that aren't supporting the goals that the businesses have. And so just really being able to understand that and start to communicate that and start to sell that, right? And I got brought to these different meetings and I would be on pitch conversations all the time, of like selling
Yeah.
the idea of what we did as an agency. And I love that. I love that part of it too, and talking with people and solving, really like connecting with the actual people of these
Yeah.
businesses and helping them, really get more value out of stuff. And that's where it really led me on to starting my own thing, which, ultimately came about a year later.
This podcast is powered by Brandu, a digital marketing agency that not only provides a diverse mix of digital services, but offers guidance, experience, and true partnership to bring your business to the next level. We offer expertise in analytics, paid media, web development, SEO, and design, just to name a few. We've worked with businesses on every level, from local operations to Fortune 500 companies across a variety of industries. We have expertise to help strategize and execute your digital marketing needs no matter what step in the process you're at. We're there for you. From wireframes to paid campaigns. Brandu, experts in everything digital. Please reach out today to learn more about how we can help your business grow.
You worked in an agency for a year. You start your own thing. Tell me a little bit about that decision.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I started to I had two very close friends of mine. One was a designer and one was used to be a CPA.
Mhm.
They were brothers. And I was like, okay, guys, like I know enough now about websites and analytics and somewhat about, development, like building websites, kind of that. Well, actually, I knew enough about the marketing side that I thought, okay, I want to, start my own thing. And here's two friends who can, help me with the business side and the branding side. So we started to go in and, decide, let's just start saying we do this. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And we developed a brand called Grew and Bleen, which is a spoonerism for blue and green. It's a
Okay.
1952 theory of relativism by a guy named Nelson Goodman, where basically this blue is only blue up until this moment of time. After this moment of time, you cannot prove that that perception of blue would not turn into a perception of green. And therefore, your concept of what is right now is not always the same. And that we felt was very, it was a good allegory to marketing, right? What is
Yeah.
right now does not necessarily mean that it will always be. And so we want to make sure that we're always looking ahead and always anticipating that change from blue to green. Problem with Grew and Bleen is it's a horrible name and no one could figure it out. So we ended up with a lot of branding issues, but it was a good concept. And yeah, I mean, like we very, quickly realized that we needed to do dev too, because when you're setting up marketing, you also need like oftentimes the websites are not good or you need to fix the websites and you can't just do marketing without the core ability to control how people are actually seeing the website, interacting with the website. So we ended up as an analytics full service, also website company as well. And we did that for 7 years.
All right. So you start this. That's an amazing and that's amazing. Most businesses don't make it that long, and you ran that for quite a bit.
They're still
What's
going. It's
They're still
been up for
growing.
13 years. It's
That's
great.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And I'm curious a little bit about at what point did you start offering this service, this kind of like CRO style
Yeah.
service?
So, um, pretty much in year 6 out of 7 for
Okay.
me, right?
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
like, for a long time, it was full service. We were doing and, like, full service did not really include like, we didn't really include CRO because I didn't really know too much about CRO at that time, but it was very analytics. Like, half of our business was, like, analytics and data, implementations, and half of it was dev and marketing services, right? And we did that for like 6 years without growing, pretty much, or I would say 5 years without growing, and it was like 5 core people who were just doing that, right?
Right, right, right.
And then in like year 6, we got kind of fed up with the marketing side of things. We didn't love performance and having to be accountable for performance. And we felt like our skill sets were more like on the back end decision making, and also on we were strong in design, we were strong
Sure.
in dev, we were strong in
Yeah.
analytics, we weren't as strong in marketing. How do we combine all those things? What can we do with dev, design, and analytics, right? What can we do
Yeah,
with
yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah.
And we
Yeah.
had this like magical moment, right, where we were like, okay, guys, let's rebrand, which we did at this time, around 5 years. And then let's concentrate on combining these services together. What does that look like, right? As a service. And so we changed our name from Grew and Bleen, which was like the hardest thing to pronounce, to how do we keep GB,
Mhm.
um, you know, Grew and Bleen agency without what's the most simple version of a GMB? So we changed it to Great Big Digital Agency, which was what it ended up being. And we started to figure out that we could sell this service called CRO, which was basically combining design, development, and analytics, right?
Yeah.
And I hired a guy that a friend of mine who had I had been doing some contracting through other agencies through GBDA, and I was brought into actually the Venetian. I'm going to name drop that to do analytics there. Tenuity, another agency here, brought me in to do that. Um, and I was the analytics guy, and I had met a CRO guy who just did their CRO. And I was like, wow, this is a service that really resonates with me. So I asked him if he knew anybody, and he knew this guy. And I hired this guy to basically train us over basically 6 months
Mm-hmm.
on everything related to CRO. How to sell it, how to do it, how to like, what is it? Like everything, and basically from there, I was able to really understand the service and what it was and what it is and how to use it and the tools that we needed to use with it. And I had a pretty good sense of how to sell it too. So like that's where that came from. And and we grew the business at that point with analytics and CRO and dev to over figures during that time, and then I burned out, and then I jumped ship. So
Okay.
yeah,
All right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to have that responsibility, even if you're really good at the service itself, it's a lot to have that responsibility to manage the whole business pipeline and
yeah.
everything
I,
for it.
I'm much better at
Yeah.
like much less stressed as a subject matter expert than I am as a CEO. So
Yep.
yeah,
And so, okay, so why from the future? So is that where you
Mhm.
went to next?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. So that's where I went to next. So like around the time when I was having my first kid,
Mhm.
I was already feeling super burned out. I
Yeah.
had been doing contracting through doing analytics work through uh, a mutual connection of mine, Lance Hollander, who is the CEO
Yeah.
now at From the Future, but he was just a board member at that point. And he was like, I have this other agency. Right now, they're an SEO agency, which is what From the Future was at that time,
Mhm.
but I'm bringing a bunch of, like other aspects to it. And I want you to basically head up the analytics and CRO department. We're bringing in a paid media agency. We're going to change this into basically a programmatic, agency that, and you would essentially be, um, he- head of analytics at that time. I wasn't doing CRO as much, right? And so I said, "Yeah, sure. This sounds good. I need a full-time job. I'm really burned out on, doing this, and then I'm having a son coming up. Yeah, this is gonna be probably less stressful overall for me, And so I
Yeah.
ended up selling my shares to my partners and going over there. And within 2 or 3 years, they wanted to really lean on CRO as a service too. And I said, yeah, I'll do that. Like how I say, yeah, I'll do that. It's all
Yeah,
about, yeah,
yeah,
I'll
yeah.
do that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that all of this starts with you getting frustrated with the Salesforce
Yeah.
implementation
Yeah.
and now looking how that's set up.
I think like, it's
Yeah.
it's a bunch of different frustrations that propelled me into the next step in my life,
Mhm.
and I think, the moral of the story is if you're frustrated, do
Mhm.
something about it and figure out where that thing that you're doing about it can also help you in your own life progress. So I think that's the moral of it all.
Pretty amazing. And now you're leading the team, you're leading the practice over there from the future.
Yep.
You get to, as you mentioned, uh, spend time, with the Simo Ahava, the other, the people that you looked up to earlier in your career. You're now peers, doing this kind of work. And you're doing a lot of speaking and a lot of other kinds of engagements. You spoke recently at our Philly Analytics event, and that was extremely well received. And you're kind of bringing some of your other interests back into this space. Tell tell some people about, music and how that
Yep.
crosses over with what you're doing.
I think, as I mentioned, my first part of my career was all just music. And I like to say, like, I was leaning super hard on my right brain in my 20s, right?
Mhm.
And that was so much fun, but I had no money, right? I literally had like, $300 to my name a month, when I was during that time. And it was fun, but it was also not sustainable. And then pendulum swung. And when I did GBDA, I really felt like it was left brain, left brain, left brain. Even though I was doing some creative stuff, it was really hard to feel like I was actually having fun in like what I was doing in my career. And it was, we were trying to be super businessy and it never really felt like mine, right? It just felt like we were creating this thing that was for everybody else to show that we did
Yeah.
this stuff for everybody else. And so
Yeah.
when I left GBDA, I I had um a friend who was like a brand advisor
Mhm.
at that time, and we would have these like philosophical discussions. I would get on a call with him and he would be, he's very thoughtful guy, very thoughtful, very successful.
Uh,
And I, was talking to him about like leaving the business and all this stuff. And I was like, man, I feel like really difficult to like lean into myself. Like I am a singing, dancing person and like that's who I am. And now I'm doing this analytics stuff. And how do I bring, and he said to me, and I'll never forget it. He said, who would not want to work with the singing and dancing analytics guy? And I said, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe I should just go all in on that and see what
Mhm.
happens. And, when Universal Analytics was sunsetting,
Mhm.
I thought it would be fun and funny to write a Universal Analytics or a Universal Sunset song, right? And I was
Yeah.
like, I'll just do this, and just throw it out there, and see what happens. And people really resonated with it, and they were like, "What are you doing? Who is this person who's
Yeah.
writing this song about this thing that's happening in our careers?" And that was the first time that I really truly felt like I was able to stand out in this field. I know I was good at it, but really stand out for just being myself, you know?
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
and being fun. And like a couple years earlier, I'd gone to South by Southwest and like,
Yeah.
did a whole conversation around Google Tag Manager. And I felt like, it was very dry, very boring. And I was like, man, I'm not good at this. But then I started to have
Yeah.
fun and with what I was saying, and it really resonated. And so like, I think if you have these things that you feel like are not part, if you're into sewing, if you're into, cooking, how do you bring that into your career to make both sides of yourself happier? And that's
Yeah.
really what you're trying to do, right? Like just have fun, and people want to work with fun. They really do. That's what I've learned. And it really helped me with my self branding and really all these people that I learned with over the years. I was able to get into Measure Summit, which was the biggest kind of like online analytics system by like showing off that I did this music stuff. And then I ultimately wrote a song for all the speakers that day and put that out there as just a self-promotion type of thing with all these people who are bigger than me, and they all loved it and reshared it and reposted, and they say, who's this Josh guy? So like
Mhm.
again, stuff like that can really help you personally build your own brand, for that. So,
That's cool. And so can people go and find this song that you
yes.
made about Universal Analytics?
So I turned that Universal Sunset song into a full album. It's a rock opera. It has a lot of the people that we all looked up to in the
Yeah.
analytics space. I have two albums: User Journey Volume One, User Journey Volume Two. They star people like Simo Ahava, Juliana
Yeah.
Jackson, some people who are really big in this space.
Mhm.
So check it out. Yeah, definitely. You go on Spotify, or if you don't prefer Spotify, it's on all the other platforms too.
Awesome. So definitely I recommend everybody check it out. Um, all right. So here we are. You're, you know, there's a lot going on in the industry right now with AI. There's a
Mhm.
lot going on in the industry. It's always evolving. Like you said, where it was when you were in school versus where it was 10 years later versus where it is now. A lot's changed and it's going to keep changing. I'd like to hear, you being at the forefront, kind of at the bleeding edge of this practice. Where do you see it going? And obviously, we got to bring up AI.
Yeah.
How do you see it playing a role?
So right now, AI is, the most that I think you can get out of it right now, is where it sits in terms of the process around like, enriching data or like an automation where you have AI, kind of taking data and information and then assessing, either creating kind of enhancements to that data or like an example of that would be like lead scoring, right? It can automatically do that based off of its own knowledge around certain people's businesses, et cetera, right? So there's absolutely practical use cases of AI right now, though I think it's very overhyped. However, in the future, when this stuff gets better,
Mhm,
right, and there's more connectivity between analytics platforms and um, CRO platforms and all this stuff. Like you can see this in like a tool like Amplitude, which is, a tool that I would think is kind of at the forefront of, kind of all of the different pieces that go into, data and analysis and marketing. And it's taking the information, using machine learning to observe what's happening in real time, right?
mhm,
And then
mhm,
outputting with LLMs, right? Um, what you can do with that data, right, in real time. So like, person like a lot of friction on XYZ page. Maybe you could improve it by, changing this to that, right? And then
mhm.
button click to it actually happening on the website, right? Or
Yeah.
in the future, no button click. It's just constantly optimizing at hyper speed,
Mhm,
for that person's personal journey of what it's seeing. Who is that person? What are they there for? What's going to resonate the most in that moment for you, for them? It's hyper personalization, right? For that
mhm.
end user. And ultimately that is going to be way more effective than any type of A/B testing because you're taking A/B testing is all about groups of users at like a long speed, right? Hyper
Right.
personalization is anticipating what that end user needs in that moment and then optimizing everything to that, right? So,
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a lot more action from analysis and then back to action, back to analysis, back to action without human intervention, you know? Will
And
that last? I don't know. It kinda takes the fun out of everything, right? So, we'll see.
I think it could. It's interesting to me. You know, in that world, how do they know that, for example, the hyper personalization didn't do something that
Yeah,
isn't intended? We know a lot of these AI tools and LLMs and things hallucinate. They miss key. It's hard to bound things, right?
yeah.
It seems to be like one of the biggest challenges. And so it could put a button in a weird place, or it could, you know, um, do something that had you seen it, you wouldn't have approved it. And, how do you see that problem being overcome?
Yeah, about a year ago, I got turned on to a platform, the name of it is not coming to me right now, is like Twit or something like that, where they were approaching this exact scenario, um, by basically doing a global A/B test with
Mhm.
hyper personalization versus non hyper personalization, right?
Okay.
Where
Yeah.
it was basically testing in an A/B, situation of like, here is your part of the website to here's
Yeah.
your 50% of users to do whatever you want with, and we're going to take the other 50% and we're going to hyper personalize, and you can see which one works better. You know,
Yeah.
and so that's an interesting approach to it in terms of like, a blanket, is this better than that? But you're right, where without the oversight it's very easy to see how this could snowball into a bad direction, a really bad direction, which
Yeah.
would cause a pendulum swing the other way, right? Of like, wow, this is like really, we want to really have our hands completely on this because of compliance, because of privacy, because of all this stuff that
Sure.
we need to
Yeah. Yeah.
take into consideration instead of like, just letting the robots go wild, you know?
Yeah. I also wonder, from a user perspective, if you can't count on your sessions to be, there's no structure. If things are too flexible, it sort of makes it difficult for you to even know what to expect or what you can or can't
Right.
get out of like there's a certain degree I've seen that when you change certain things in A/B tests, there's some friction for the existing users or the past users, um, just because it's different. They
Yeah.
just don't know where to find things. And you kind of run into this like dip with the past users before you see the climb.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, kind of like, do you think, that's a risk?
Totally. I mean,
Yeah.
I know the amount of times that like just Netflix is a great example of this, right? Where its whole approach is hyper personalization, right? What should you watch next? What should you watch right now? And and they're expecting that by hyper personalizing, I'm going to have a better experience. But the amount of times that I've gone on Netflix and can't find the thing that I'm trying to watch because I'm in the middle of it because they're hyper personalizing what I should watch next or for me, is a lot, which is ridiculous, right? You would think that it's right center for me that I should be able to find what I'm looking for because I've already experienced it, but it's somewhere buried in the recommendations for me, right? And that is an example of hyper personalization gone bad, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, there is a balance of, let's make a better experience for the users and learn what works, right? Personally, versus like letting machine learning just go crazy, right?
Mhm.
Ultimately, you would be able to achieve faster results with machine learning and
Yeah.
AI, but you don't necessarily know, you have no control over that. That's the problem with PMAX, right? Everyone,
Mhm.
PMAX is all about like, hey, just feed it into the system and, we're not going to tell you anything about the data, but like it's going to work. See, just put in like your
Yeah.
budget here and we'll get it to work, right? Meanwhile, you have no freaking idea what's
Yeah.
happening with it,
It
right? And so there's, that issue of you're losing control and ultimately is that actually where we want to go as humans with this stuff, you know?
I'm curious, so, as a professional in the space and, thinking about people that might be starting their careers and wanting to go in this direction, it seems like there's gotta be a role if that PMAX style site optimization is the default. If that
Yeah,
becomes the new normal, then there's gotta be a role for people to create experiences that win against that,
yeah,
to come up with strategies or to come up with different angles or frameworks that my optimization has to beat your auto optimization,
sure.
right?
And that's all about, the confidence, the storytelling, your ability to insert yourself, right? Your ability to say, I know there's a better way, which goes back
Mhm.
to the beginning of this conversation, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Which
yeah.
is like, if there is somebody who thinks to themselves, I know there's a better way, you are always going to find opportunities, right? Because
Yeah.
people will listen to you. And if you can prove yourself right, and you can make that case and then, actually go out there and prove it, people are going to give you opportunities and they're going to tell their friends.
So it sounds like there's, new jobs still available or an evolution of jobs just to be the people that can kind of steer, these tools, these AI tools and some of these dynamic pieces.
Yeah.
And your point earlier about intuition playing a big role, sometimes, being able to go and look at the data and reinterpret what the AI was doing, what variations it tried, and see what your human intuition can draw from it that maybe the AI didn't notice.
Well, it goes back to it said it in the very beginning of this conversation, though. I just wanted to like note on it is that The reason that it's not always going to be perfect is because sometimes ugly wins. What does that mean? Well, sometimes you can think that this is a horrible experience because X, Y, and Z, there's hamster dams jumping all over the place, but ultimately people like hamsters. I don't know, but it
Yeah.
wins, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that is something that if you just purely throw into AI's hands, they're killing those hamsters. They're not going to let those hamsters be up there. But
Yeah.
sometimes ugly wins. And because people are weird and they're imperfect and, they, no matter what you think should happen, it doesn't always happen. Right. And so ultimately, humans are there for humans and we're creating decisions and we're doing things that are going to resonate more than what a bot would for us. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't, but just like us.
Well, I think that is a great way to put it, to place it. And I think you've provided invaluable information for people that want to make a career in the space. Um, could you tell people a little bit about where to find you and tell them a little bit about some of the other things that you're doing online?
Sure. The best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I have a, pretty, exhaustive presence there where I'm constantly doing things that are sometimes work related and sometimes very bizarre. So you can definitely follow me there. I have a show called Third Party Show, which is basically if you were to combine the Tonight Show, Pee Wee Herman, and analytics or
Yeah.
whatever, marketing.
Hmm.
And so, it's essentially a variety show with skits and music and comedy and marketing, all about marketing. So check that out. I have a YouTube channel called Analytical that has a bunch of music and songs. And then you can find me on Spotify or any of the music channels, Josh Silverbauer and Friends. So those are what I will plug. And I'm sure I'm going to have something weird tomorrow because I'll say, yeah, let's do that too. So
It's been a pleasure speaking with you, Josh.
Yeah, Josh, this has been great. Specifically, like your journey into this, I always find is very interesting. You spoke very directly to me, having a background at audio, and why we're here right now.
why we're here.
So always a pleasure.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on. A lot of fun.
So to all of our listeners, thanks for spending time with us. Learn more about BrainDo and our marketing services on our website at www.brain.do. If you'd like to see more from us, consider subscribing or giving us a follow. We can be found at brain.do on Instagram or other social media at the exact same handle. Otherwise, we'll see you next time at the Roundtable.